Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and today I'm going to go back to the old trick of combining my hobbies with taking scraps from nerf projects and turning them into minis for tabletop games. Now, anyone who's watched any of my videos over the last kind of 4 years I've been doing nerf kind of projects, you will have seen the vast quantity of scrap plastic that I have torn out of quite a few Nerf guns for various reasons, to improve their function, to improve their aesthetics, or honestly to degrade them rather than improve them. But yeah, anyway, I've gone through a vast quantity of tiny little bits of plastic is what I'm getting at. Now these tiny little bits of plastic usually just end up getting thrown in the bin, but I think I can do better. I can recycle them, and so I have made this little chap, and I will go through the process of making a couple more. And as this is all quite small, I think we're going to need a different camera angle. Alright, let's get started just by tearing these bits up, just that little bit more. They're already broken, so why not break them more? And I'm using a variety of tools. Obviously all of this has come out of Dremel in one way or another. And you could certainly use a Dremel to cut these bits down further. And you can use a knife, and you can use pliers, and you can use clippers. Whatever it is that just gives the edges a more interesting shape. And the more variety of shape means the more variety you will get in your finished model. So this idea came around because of a particular character that Amethyst Quill wanted to play, or wanted to have access to in a Dungeons and Dragons game. And that character would be a construct. And a construct in this context is a collection of scrap metal that's animated into kind of like a golem, really. I've been referring to these as scrap golems, but metal construct, scrap golem, whatever you want to call them, is fine by me. So now that I've got a variety of shapes, I can start gluing them together. Now, I expect that the vast majority of people will just use some super glue, maybe even some super glue and bicarbonate of soda, because that makes for a really nice like welded torn metal look, which would look pretty good in this context. However, I don't trust superglue, or rather I do trust superglue. I trust superglue to fail. But what I can do instead is just run some epoxy and start blobbing some bits together. A start to get the general shape out of these larger pieces. And I'm going for a pretty humanoid look with these. You, of course, can make them however you want. And we can go back and even tear up some more pieces to make them look just how we want. Honestly, I have no idea what this one's turning into, but it certainly isn't humanoid. Maybe I can give it a hover pack of some type. If it's not going to make sense, let's make sure that it doesn't make sense properly. And that certainly doesn't make sense. Well, that's turned into mostly just a pile of scrap, which is sort of the design aesthetic we're going for. Although I was kind of hoping to get something a little less dorky looking than that one, and a little more, well, relevant looking than that one. Let's see. Excellent thing about epoxy is that I can just move stuff around for a few minutes. It isn't instant. I should really be aiming for like 28, 32 millimeters ish, but whatever they show up as, whatever they turn up as, I'm sure that's fine. Okay, and I'm out of the working time of the epoxy, so I'll leave those to set. So interestingly, I'm going to point out a bit of a difference between my test model that I did first and the ones I'm doing for the video today. And it's the difference between the liquid epoxy resin that I'm using for this video, but for my test model I was using an epoxy putty which behaves slightly differently. So I was doing a different project and had a lump of epoxy left over, and I stuck some of the plastic bits to it, just pressed them in. And if you see kind of here and here, these bulge shapes here as well, kind of just as the epoxy has oozed out in between the bits of plastic. But the more liquid epoxy resin that I'm using here doesn't behave in the same way. It flows rather than being squished out in between the plastic. It's just flowing between it and obviously pulling on the back. That's actually kind of a good thing to understand, because different tools, different equipment, different supplies work in different ways. And being able to choose which supply or which type of glue or whatever suits your project best is the way to go. For this project, for kind of recreating this, I probably should have stuck with the epoxy putty, but now that I've got this far, what I'm going to do is change track again to something completely different. And you'll notice I have out some super glue and bicarbonate of soda, put a overly generous blob of super glue in place, press another part into it, hopefully for long enough that it actually sticks. There we go. I can sprinkle a bit of the bicarbonate of soda over the top, which will help the reaction along. And that then forms this kind of bubbly, flaky texture to that join. It makes it fairly strong. It's still super glue, so it's not that strong, but it's strong enough. And the surface texture of this, and it's almost immediately kind of crystallized. Once that's cleaned up and painted, that can look like a weld or rusty metal, depending on how I paint it. Now for this one, which is kind of looking a bit dorky, I'm going to reverse it. So instead of having this being the front, which was my original intention, I'm going to just modify it and make this the front. So I need some new pieces over here, a little bit of super glue, press on my part, hold it for a few seconds until it holds, then it's super glue so it won't, and then sprinkle on bicarbonate of soda, and there we go. That looks actually worse. Well, I'm just going to keep on going until I get roughly what I was aiming at. Well, I certainly didn't forget to press record and then just was talking to a camera that wasn't recording. That definitely didn't happen. What did happen was I got to changing these up a little bit. I've added some more pieces. I've added an extra piece to be sort of just another metal plate on the front. Added the arms. I've tried to make the legs a little more dynamic. I think this one does look a little bit dorky still. It's a lot better than it was, but it's not quite... It's okay, it's passable. This one is looking a little better. It's a little less distinct. It still is humanoid, 2 legs, 2 arms and all of that, but a lot less regular in its shapes. So I'm much more happy with this one. Particularly on this arm, this edge here was made with the clippers by clipping at different angles. And that was one of the pieces, I think I made this piece right at the beginning of the video. But having that shape that's kind of like a sharpened metal blade, that looks pretty menacing. And I'm pretty sure that these are good enough now that I can step over to the painting section. But what I'll do first, because they've got loads of this powder on them in various places, I'm going to give them a quick rinse in water, let them dry, and then spray paint the base coat down, which will be a little secret weapon that I've been using, and that is a brown spray paint. Ooh, so let's skip ahead to that. This spray paint is a little bit glossy, so that's going to make it interesting when it comes to painting it, but we'll see how far we get. And I'm going to start with a dry brush of, I've got a metallic, it's a silver and then black paint mixed in to darken it down. We'll see how that goes on. And I put some extra metal pieces on the base, so I want to make sure I get those as well. Not really trying to be very neat at this step, just trying to get most of it covered. I do want some of the brown showing because that'll be nice in the recesses to be rust or dirt or just free weathering really. Okay, and now I'll make a second pass with a much brighter silver. This is again more of a dry brush than a layer, so I'm using some kitchen paper off to the side to wipe off some of the paint to try and get it as a dry brush. Not that I'm any good at all with dry brushing, but it can be a pretty heavy dry brush at this stage. Again, hang the stuff on the base. And some bits can be a brighter silver than others. I am not going for a uniform look with this. If you want to go for a uniform look for a different effect, that is valid. How about that? That's looking okay. So these three are starting to look a little more unified now. One thing I did on the original, so you see I've actually painted a couple of bits of metal. There's some red, there's some green, there's some grey, and that's just to imply that these pieces of metal have come from scraps of all sorts of other things. So if I just go ahead and do the same thing with these and just pick a colour and just paint a few pieces. I'll try to stay away from jagged edges, but anywhere where there's a nice big flat surface that can be painted on. And yeah, anywhere where there's texture, where there's that kind of bubbly super glue or the kind of shards of epoxy or the broken bits of plastic, I'm going to try and stay away from those. Although I can always come back with the silver again later on. And now a different colour just for some variety. And a bluey grey as well. This seems to be becoming my most favourite paint of all because it's so desaturated. It kind of fits in a lot of places. But we'll give that piece there a go. There's not much room for this kind of detail, but I'll throw in a couple of bits here and then maybe on the shoulder as well. There we go. I don't want to cover up all of the metal. I want it to still read as mostly broken metal, but I want the colours to show that the metal has come from somewhere. I've had a few complaints of people saying that, oh, you shouldn't just dunk stuff in a black wash and do the whole thing at once. You should kind of apply it with the paintbrush. Well, to that I respond, I do what I want. And you as well. Go on. And now that the wash is dry, that's pretty much it. You can go back and do some more weathering effects, some rust work. You can do some edge highlighting with some silver to bring out the details. You can do exactly how much you want to do, and that is, of course, the point of this. And even if there's something that you don't like in one of the finished pieces, you can just change it and make it something else. Glue some other bits on. There's a point where you have to call it done, but until then, keep going. So there we go, these little scrap golems, metal monsters, constructs, whatever you want to call them, are done. I've used a variety of techniques for a variety of effects, and that just proves the point that stuff like this, use what you've got, because you can probably make something look good. Anyway, so that leaves me to say I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.